Most men are marching blindfolded into heartbreak, not because they lack strength, but because they refuse to see the game they're playing. Schopenhauer spoke centuries ago about love as nature's cruel trick, a biological command disguised as sacred fire. Yet here we are, still drowning in the same illusions, mistaking desire for destiny, pain for proof of love. The bitter truth? You're not broken because she left. You're broken because you never understood what you signed up for. This isn't just about love lost. It's about a life lost in chasing shadows. And if you want to stop the bleeding, you must start by unmasking the lies you've told yourself. Because only when you see love as a trap, not a treasure, can you begin to reclaim the freedom you never knew you lost. He didn't call it suffering, he called it loyalty. The weight in his chest felt noble, like proof that his love was real, but that was the first lie. That pain meant depth, that heartbreak was holy. In truth, he was clinging to a story that never truly held him. A man can burn for years thinking it's passion, when it's really identity withdrawal. The woman was never his anchor. She was the screen onto which he projected himself. He wasn't in love with her. He was addicted to the man he thought he became in her gaze. When she vanished, so did the mirror. And now he stares into the quicksand of his own absence. Jung once said, "Neurosis is the refusal of legitimate suffering." This wasn't heartbreak. It was detox from illusion. He thought she left him, but the truth, she left the character he wrote to survive her. He confused being needed with being seen, and now that she's gone, so is his script. This is what Schopenhauer meant. Love isn't sacred, it's survival dressed as romance. What hurts isn't her loss. It's the collapse of the fantasy where he mattered. The puppet strings are cut, but he's still performing, alone, for an audience of ghosts. He wore his pain like a badge, not because it meant love, but because it meant value. He thought, if I'm hurting, then it must have been real. But even a dream can leave scars. And not all scars mean meaning. The real wound. He made himself the offering and called it connection. She didn't reject him. She outgrew the illusion he refused to abandon. He stayed not because she was good to him, but because leaving felt like betrayal. Not betrayal of her, betrayal of the identity he built in her presence. And that's the trap, confusing emotional pain with emotional depth. A man will suffer endlessly if it makes him feel noble, even if it makes him invisible. Love didn't break him. His refusal to see through the fog did. Every time he begged her to stay, he wasn't asking for love. He was begging to remain valid. He didn't want her presence. He wanted the self-image her presence allowed him to maintain. And when she finally walked, she didn't take his heart. She took his scaffolding. He was left not with emptiness, but with the ruins of a temple built on projection. This is what withdrawal looks like when you've mistaken a fantasy for a home. Now he calls it heartbreak. But heartbreak ends. What he's facing now is exile from a version of himself that never truly existed. He doesn't miss her. He misses the echo of himself that only lived through her validation. Pain was never proof of love. It was proof of dependency. And until he calls it what it is, he'll keep bleeding in the name of something that never bled for him. He thought rejection meant failure, like he lacked something she needed. But instincts don't operate with morality. They operate with utility. She didn't punish him, she repurposed him, like an app no longer compatible with her latest version. It wasn't personal, it was strategic. He was judged, yes, but not on his soul, on his function. This is the cruelty of attraction. It's not about your depth, but your timing. She didn't find someone better. She found someone useful to the story she now believes in. You weren't discarded, you were archived. And that sting in your gut, that's ego, not essence. Men often believe rejection means inferiority, but nature doesn't speak in praise or insults, only signals. When the emotional contract expires, she won't send a letter. She'll vanish. That's not betrayal, that's evolution. And evolution never asks for consent. You didn't fall short, you just fell out of season. What was once magnetic became mundane to her next mission. It's not cruelty, it's the algorithm of instinct, reshuffling for maximum gain. And you still thought it was about love. That's why it hurt. Not because she left, but because your meaning did. The most dangerous fantasy a man carries is this: if I'm good enough, she'll stay. But the feminine doesn't orbit goodness, it orbits resonance. And when your frequency stops matching her need, her silence grows louder than any goodbye. She reclassifies you, emotionally, spiritually, sexually, without needing to explain. You wanted closure, but instinct doesn't write epilogues. It simply stops investing energy where it no longer sees return. So when she pulled away, she wasn't being cruel, she was being efficient. A woman rarely announces when you've become obsolete. She just lets your texts grow colder until silence becomes the answer. She didn't stop loving you, she stopped needing you in the way you felt important. That distinction is everything, because love can linger, even in disinterest. But when you no longer serve the new narrative, the chapter closes, and the role you played, it gets erased. Not out of malice, but momentum. She didn't change, she just shifted dimensions. You were still in the old one. So stop asking, why wasn't I enough? You were enough for the version of her you met, not the one she's becoming. This is the labyrinth of rejection. It's not your worth that was denied, but your placement. And once you see it clearly, you stop bleeding for what was never promised, because survival instincts don't send thank you letters, they just move on. He thought openness was strength, that by revealing everything, he'd be seen as trustworthy. But what he offered as transparency, she received as predictability, not because she was cruel, but because the mystery had vanished. And desire cannot live in a place it can fully explain. She once leaned into him with wonder, but over time she stopped asking questions because she already knew the answers. She read him like a book with no hidden chapters. What he thought was connection was overexposure. And Jung warned, what is too known loses its grip on the unconscious. He made himself her therapist, her diary, her comfort, but not her enigma, not her challenge, not her myth. And so her gaze dulled, not out of hate, but out of boredom. He became the safe harbor, but she wanted the storm. Not chaos, but tension, that sacred electricity of the unknown. He wasn't punished for being emotional. He was punished for being deciphered. Because when a man becomes too legible, he ceases to awaken the symbolic in her. And women, especially unintegrated ones, crave that which disturbs their pattern. She didn't leave him for being soft. She left because softness without edge becomes invisible. He thought, if I love deeply, she'll stay. But love without sovereignty becomes servitude. He didn't protect his depth, he displayed it on a platter. And once she saw everything, the archetype collapsed. He stopped being the flame and became the fireplace. Warm, reliable, dull. A man must know, not all exposure is intimacy. Sometimes it's erosion. When you give without tension, you become comfort food, not desire. What ignites her spirit isn't availability, it's gravitational pull. The sense that there's more, and she's not entitled to all of it. He believed in being understood, but some parts of you must remain sacred, not hidden, but held. Mystery isn't manipulation. It's spiritual architecture. It's the difference between presence and performance. He gave her everything, and in doing so, gave her nothing to discover. You don't need to be a riddle, just not a manual. Depth is not the same as detail. Emotion must be anchored in tension, not need. Let her earn the descent, not receive it in one sitting. Because if you become obvious, you stop being archetypal and start being replaceable. He followed every cue, listened, adapted, softened, evolved, became the man she described in her midnight confessions. He gave her everything, except the one thing she didn't ask for, contrast, because deep down she didn't want a mirror. She wanted polarity. She told him she wanted sensitivity. He became gentle. She said she wanted stability. He became predictable. She asked for presence. He became always available, and with every adjustment she drifted. Not because he failed, but because he succeeded too well in becoming tame. Schopenhauer warned us, desire doesn't crave similarity. It craves its opposite. Fire doesn't seek more fire, it seeks what burns it brighter. And he, in his devotion, extinguished the tension that once made him magnetic. He confused compliance with connection, and in doing so, erased the architecture of masculine presence. She didn't want a servant, she wanted a sovereign, not control, but containment, not obedience, but edge. And he gave her comfort when she needed confrontation. This is the irony of the compliant man. He becomes invisible, not because he's insufficient, but because he's too accessible. He thought love was sacrifice, that if he shed enough layers, she'd finally feel safe. But she didn't want a man who lost himself to hold her. She wanted a man who could hold himself while holding her, and when she felt his spine dissolve, she lost the current that once pulled her in. This is emotional suicide dressed as empathy. He gave her the throne and called it love, but a woman doesn't want to sit beside a man who kneels, not because she's cruel, because she needs polarity to feel intimacy. She wanted strength, not submission. She didn't leave because he lacked heart. She left because he stopped leading with his. The masculine must be, not just respond, and in trying to be everything she wanted, he became nothing she craved. You don't attract devotion by echoing her needs, but by embodying your center. So now he sits with the silence asking, what did I do wrong? And the answer is cruel but clean. He gave too much of the wrong thing. He surrendered identity for affection and got neither. What you surrender to possess will never respect you, and what walks away was never yours. Only the illusion she once projected onto your posture. He thinks he misses her. But what he truly grieves is the version of himself he buried to keep her close. He silenced his instincts, softened his edges, rewrote his truth, all for proximity. And now, in the stillness she left behind, he hears echoes of the man he once was. Not in anger, in elegy. Jung warned, when a man merges with the feminine without boundaries, he returns to the mother, not to love but to dependency. Regression dressed as intimacy, and that's the trap, confusing fusion with connection. She didn't demand his identity, he offered it. Because losing himself felt safer than losing her. He called it love, but what he practiced was self-abandonment with a romantic soundtrack. He didn't want union, he wanted anesthesia. A woman to numb the war he refused to face within, and so he made her his oxygen. Until she became his suffocation. She didn't leave him. She left the version of him that stopped growing, that man who turned silence into a strategy, softness into a currency. He became static, a placeholder for her emotional weather, and in doing so, he became disposable. You can't stay in someone's life if you disappear from your own. This is why grief cuts so deep, not because of her absence, but because of your erasure. You sacrificed voice, vision, and volition in exchange for temporary warmth, and now that warmth is gone, and you're left shivering in a body that no longer feels like home. It's not heartbreak, it's resurrection pain. Because the ghost of who you were is demanding to return. She didn't kill your masculinity, you silenced it, told it to wait, to shrink, to be palatable. You thought peace meant the absence of tension, but peace built on suppression is just a slow suicide. You weren't loved, you were tolerated until your function expired. The lie was beautiful. If I become who she needs, she'll stay. But who she needs keeps changing, and you can't chase shifting ground forever. Your sacrifice wasn't honored, it was absorbed. And that's the cruel alchemy of emotional codependence. You give everything and think it's love, but it's just erosion. Now, your grief has a shape. It's not her. It's the man you betrayed to stay in her light. It's the silence you swallowed, the fire you dimmed, the truth you traded. And if you're brave enough to name it, you might just begin to resurrect. Because healing isn't loving her again. It's loving the man who never got to live. He called it love, but it was hunger, not the hunger of the soul, the hunger of the neglected child. He wasn't chasing a woman. He was chasing a role, the one who matters, not because she was sacred, but because her validation felt like survival. And that's the wound, needing someone just to feel real. She didn't have to be right, she just had to choose him. Because in that choice, he found brief relief from his own invisibility. This wasn't spiritual alignment. It was emotional compensation. Schopenhauer warned, most affection is born from lack, not truth. And in his case, the lack was louder than the love. He thought he desired her, but when he looked deeper, he realized he desired purpose through her gaze. Every gesture was an offering. Every silence a test, every smile a reward. He wasn't in love, he was auditioning, performing the role of the man who finally feels worthy. What he mistook for chemistry was dependency. What he mistook for devotion was desperation. He needed her to need him, because that made him forget how abandoned he felt by himself. This isn't romance, it's survival disguised in tenderness, and the soul knows the difference, even if the body doesn't. He wasn't starving for sex, he was starving for recognition, to be seen, chosen, remembered, if only for a moment. And in that starvation, he accepted breadcrumbs and called them a feast. This is the tragedy of male hunger. It looks like desire, but it's a scream. And no woman, no matter how kind, can silence it for you. She didn't break him. She just stopped feeding his illusion. And when the illusion died, the void came back. The same void he's been running from since childhood, masked in ambition, addiction, or affection. This isn't about her leaving. It's about him realizing she was never the source, only the screen. And now the projector is off, and all that's left is silence. He thought connection was about merging, but merging without selfhood is collapse. When you crave someone just to quiet the noise inside, you don't love them. You consume them, and consumption always ends in guilt, not gratitude. The soul can't love when it's begging to survive. So now he sits in the aftermath, not heartbroken, but exposed. He didn't lose a woman. He lost his disguise. And maybe that's the mercy in the pain. It stripped him of illusion, because hunger isn't a compass, it's a trap. And love, real love, doesn't arise from need. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. It arises from presence. She stopped arguing and he took it as maturity, stopped criticizing and he called it peace. But silence, when it comes too early, too cleanly, is rarely surrender. It's strategy, withdrawal disguised as devotion. And he, desperate for stability, clung to it like truth. He thought, at least she's not like the others. She doesn't fight. But stillness isn't always serenity. Machiavelli would smirk. Silence often hides intentions more dangerous than any scream. She wasn't too wise to argue. She was too done to waste energy. And he confused emotional distance with emotional depth. What he couldn't see was the preparation. Every calm reply, every polite nod, every quiet evening. It was rehearsal for her exit. The blueprint was already drawn while he praised her loyalty. She stopped speaking because she was already speaking elsewhere. Emotionally, logistically, spiritually, he was being phased out. He thought absence of conflict meant presence of connection. But in truth, the bond had already rotted, not loudly, not violently, subtly, like rust on steel. When a woman is done, she rarely announces it. She just stops investing and starts documenting her reasons. He never asked why her touch changed, why her eyes stopped holding him. He didn't want to see it, because if he saw it, he'd have to act. And it's easier to pretend everything's fine than to face emotional exile. So he called her silence respect, because it hurt less than calling it retreat. But the truth, she'd already left. He was just living in her echo. He waited for the storm, but the storm never came. Just a slow drying up of attention, warmth, desire. And that's the genius of quiet exits. They don't leave wounds. They leave confusion. She didn't slam the door, she just vanished behind it, and he was too stunned by the calm to notice the absence. Machiavelli warned, "Those who do not see beneath stillness are ruled by it," and he, ruled by hope, ignored the signs. He praised her patience while she drafted distance, called her grace what was really disengagement. He romanticized her silence because it kept his fantasy alive. But silence is never neutral. It either holds sacred space or hides secrets. And now, in the hollow, he realizes she wasn't a mystery. She was a calculation, and he was the last to know, because he never dared to listen to what wasn't said. He believed his heartbreak was unique, a wound no one else could feel. But Jung whispered a darker truth. Some pain is inherited, not born. It's the echo of fathers who vanished, grandfathers who silenced their grief, ancestors who never healed. His suffering was not a lonely scream. It was a centuries-old chant. The same one passed down in shadowed bloodlines and broken promises. He thought the woman was the wound, but she was just the mirror reflecting the fracture he never faced. The patterns, the loops, the repeated betrayals, they weren't hers. They were scripts written long before he was born, and until he sees this, he's destined to act the same play. Jung showed that what we don't make conscious, we inherit. His attachment was not random, it was legacy. The unresolved grief of absent fathers, the emotional deserts of unhealed men, every rejection, every abandonment, every silence, a whisper from the past, a warning wrapped in the present. He wasn't just losing a woman, he was reenacting his father's failure to stay, his grandfather's refusal to love fully. The family ghost wasn't in the room, it was in his blood, and no matter how much he tried to outrun it, it followed. Because wounds passed down don't just scar skin, they carve souls. He thought healing meant forgetting, but forgetting is surrender. True healing means remembering, reclaiming the parts erased by generational pain. To break the cycle, he must face the shadows he inherited. Only then can he build a new legacy, one that doesn't bleed into his sons. The woman wasn't the architect of his ruin. She was the messenger of the truth he refused to face. His pain isn't personal, it's ancestral. And recognizing this is the first step toward freedom. He is not just a man. He is the sum of a lineage waiting to be redeemed. And in his awakening, he carries the power to rewrite history, not with words, but with presence. Not with escape, but with courage. The wound is deep, but the roots are stronger. And the man who embraces his inheritance, pain, scars, and all, is the man who will finally rise, not despite his past, because of it. What if everything you were looking for in her was just what you abandoned in yourself? What if the pain of losing her is the echo of losing your own edge, your own fire? You've been wandering in a labyrinth built from illusions, but the exit isn't outside, it's inside. So ask yourself, what version of you did you leave at the altar of love? What part of your soul are you ready to resurrect? Because real freedom demands brutal honesty, not with her, but with the man in the mirror. The question is, will you choose to wake up or keep sleeping? If you're ready to face that silence, subscribe, turn on notifications, and keep walking this shadowed path of self-knowledge and fierce, quiet rebirth. You've seen how love's illusions trap the soul, but what if the heartache wasn't about you at all? Schopenhauer's darkest truth cuts deeper. Love was never your choice. Next, we unravel the cold mechanics behind the fantasy and why waking up hurts more than falling asleep.